2 people were dead, a family was destroyed, and the man standing at the center of it all was the one who called 911. True crime, dark stories, and the kind of cases that keep you up at night. All things I'm mildly obsessed with. And based on the fact that you're still here, so are you. Okay, hi, welcome back. So this case is one of those ones where every single time I think I've finally hit the bottom of it, there is another layer underneath. Like it is a Russian nesting doll of crime and corruption and absolute audacity. And I have been wanting to cover this one for a long time. There is just so much here. To understand why this case shook South Carolina so deeply and why it matters beyond the borders of that state, you have to understand what the Murdaugh name actually meant in that part of the world. The Murdaugh family had dominated the 14th Judicial Circuit of South Carolina for nearly a century, 3 consecutive generations. Randolph Murdaugh Sr., then his son Randolph Jr., then Randolph III, had each served as the elected solicitor for that circuit. The solicitor is essentially the chief prosecutor, the person who decides who gets charged, who gets deals, and how the law gets applied. The 14th Circuit covers 5 counties in the Low Country region: Hampton, Allendale, Beaufort, Colleton, and Jasper. And in a region like that, rural, tight-knit, deeply rooted in tradition and old hierarchies, multi-generational legal authority does not just make you powerful, it makes you essentially untouchable. It means law enforcement knows your name. It means judges know your family. It means that the invisible architecture of justice in that entire region has been shaped for a century by people who share your bloodline. The Murdaughs were also central figures at PMPED, Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Eltroth, and Dietrich, one of the most prominent personal injury law firms in the entire state. For decades, the family had built their reputation as the people you called when you needed someone fighting in your corner. Alec Murdaugh, Richard Alexander Murdaugh, was born into all of this in 1968. He was the heir, the 3rd generation. From the moment he arrived in the world, his path was essentially pre-paved. He went to the University of South Carolina for undergrad and law school. He joined the family firm. He built his own name as a personal injury attorney. He was charming, gregarious, well-connected, and deeply embedded in the social fabric of the Low Country. He married a woman named Maggie, and together they had 2 sons, Buster and Paul. They owned a sprawling 1,700-acre hunting estate called Moselle in Colleton County, a remote, beautiful property with a main house, a dog kennel, a pond, and miles of land that felt like it had always belonged to this family, because it had. From the outside, Alec Murdaugh had everything: the dynasty, the family, the career, the estate, the name. He had built exactly the life that had been built for him to build. But underneath that perfectly constructed surface, things had been quietly rotting for a very long time. To understand the full scope of what happened, you need to go back to February 23, 2019, because this is where the first major crack appears publicly. That night, Alex's younger son Paul, who was 19 at the time, was out on a boat with a group of friends near Archer's Creek in Beaufort County. Paul had been drinking, significantly. Paul was at the wheel when the boat struck a bridge piling at high speed. The crash threw several people from the boat into the dark water. One of them, a 19-year-old girl named Mallory Beach, was swept away. Her body was recovered 7 days later, more than a mile downstream. Mallory Beach was 19 years old. She was somebody's daughter, somebody's friend. She had her whole life in front of her, and she lost it on a boat being driven recklessly by a teenager whose last name happened to be Murdaugh. And here is where the family's influence becomes deeply relevant. Because in the aftermath of that crash, the investigation moved in ways that made people uncomfortable. Questions arose about whether law enforcement's response was shaped, consciously or not, by who Paul's father and grandfather were. Paul was eventually charged with boating under the influence causing death. But many people, including Mallory's family, felt the process was slower and softer than it should have been, given that a young woman was dead. Alex was deeply involved in managing the legal and reputational fallout from the boat crash, and while he was doing that publicly, behind the scenes, something else had been going on for years. Something that had nothing to do with the boat crash and everything to do with who Alex Murdaugh really was when no one was looking. Gloria Satterfield had worked for the Murdaugh family as their housekeeper for more than 2 decades. She was devoted and hardworking and genuinely close to the family. She had watched Paul and Buster grow up. She was, by many accounts, considered almost part of the family. In February of 2018, Gloria suffered a fall at the Murdaugh home and sustained serious injuries. She was taken to hospital and she never recovered. She passed away from complications weeks later. She was 57 years old. Her death was ruled accidental, and Alex Murdaugh, the family lawyer, the trusted friend, encouraged Gloria's sons, Tony and Brian, to pursue a wrongful death lawsuit. He told them he would help them. He referred them to attorneys. He appeared supportive and present and caring. What Tony and Brian did not know, what they would not discover for years, was that Alex had arranged for the settlement funds to flow into accounts he controlled. Gloria's sons received nothing. Alex stole the entire settlement that had been meant to compensate them for the loss of their mother. I need you to sit with that. He attended Gloria Satterfield's funeral. He comforted her sons. He told them he would fight for them. And then he took the money that was meant for them from the family of his housekeeper, a woman who had worked for his family for 25 years and helped raise his children. The level of betrayal in that single act is genuinely difficult to put into words. On the evening of June 7, 2021, Alec Murdaugh called 911 from the Moselle property. His voice on that call was distressed. He told the dispatcher that he had come home from visiting his ailing mother to find his wife Maggie and his son Paul shot on the property near the dog kennels. He said he had just found them. He begged for help. Maggie Murdaugh was 52 years old. She was described by everyone who knew her as warm, fiercely devoted, and deeply loving. She adored her sons. She was a constant, grounding presence in the family. She deserved so much better than what happened to her. Paul Murdaugh was 22 years old, still young, still figuring things out, still carrying the weight of the boat crash and everything that had come with it. But he was 22. He was someone's son. He was someone's brother. He deserved the chance to grow up and find out who he was going to become. First responders arrived to find both Maggie and Paul had been fatally shot on the property. Alex was emotional when law enforcement arrived. He cooperated with investigators initially. He answered questions. He presented himself entirely as a devastated husband and father who had walked into an unimaginable horror. And at first, many people believed him because he was Alec Murdaugh, because his family had been the law in that part of South Carolina for a century, because the alternative was almost too dark to consider. But investigators had questions, and those questions were not going away. In the weeks after the murders, people who knew Alex closely began noticing things that didn't sit right. His behavior at public memorials struck some attendees as inconsistent, composed in certain moments, performatively emotional in others. People who had known him for decades described something as simply off. And then, 3 months after the murders, Alex Murdaugh did something so extraordinary that it became one of the most talked about moments in the entire case. On September 4th, 2021, Labor Day weekend, Alex pulled over on a rural road in Hampton County and called a man named Curtis Eddie Smith. Eddie was someone Alex had known for years, a man he had employed and had a long, complicated financial relationship with. Alex asked Eddie to shoot him in the head. I know. Just stay with me here. The reason Alex gave, the explanation he would later offer, was that he wanted to die so that his surviving son Buster could collect on a $10 million life insurance policy. He claimed he was so consumed by grief and addiction and mounting pressure that this had seemed like the answer. Eddie shot him. The bullet grazed Alex's head. Alex survived. And then Alex called 911 and reported he had been shot by an unknown assailant on the roadside. This man, 3 months after his wife and son were killed, staged his own shooting, asked someone to shoot him in the head, called it in as a random attack. And this is the precise moment when even the people who had been giving him every possible benefit of the doubt started to pay very serious attention. The staged shooting unraveled quickly. Eddie was identified and eventually cooperated with investigators. Alex was confronted. The initial charge was insurance fraud, but it opened a door that would never be closed again. Because when investigators started pulling on that thread, What came out was staggering. Over the course of nearly 2 decades, Alex Murdaugh had been systematically stealing from his law firm, from clients, and from settlement funds meant for some of the most vulnerable people he represented. The total amount, across hundreds of individual transactions, came to over $8.8 million. He stole from accident victims. He stole from grieving families. He stole from people who came to him in their worst moments and trusted him because he was their lawyer, and because he was a Murdaugh, and because that name was supposed to mean something. He used significant portions of that money to fund a serious opioid addiction that had developed over years, an addiction he had hidden from virtually everyone around him, including his own family. But as enormous as the financial crimes were, and they were enormous, investigators kept coming back to the murders, because as they mapped the fraud, they found a pattern of mounting pressure converging on Alex in the spring and summer of 2021. The boat crash lawsuit was accelerating. His financial crimes were getting closer to being discovered by his firm. The walls were closing in from multiple directions simultaneously. And then there was the kennel video. And the kennel video changed everything. On the night of June 7th, 2021, the same night Maggie and Paul were killed, Paul had been down at the dog kennels on the Moselle property. At 8:44 p.m., Paul recorded a short, casual video on his phone. Just a clip of a dog, nothing dramatic. But in the background of that video, you can hear voices. And one of those voices is unmistakably, clearly, Alex Murdaugh's. Now here is why that is so significant. Because Alex had told investigators that he was not at the dog kennels that evening. He said he had left the main house, driven to visit his mother, and returned later to find the bodies. He was explicit. He was not at the kennels, but the video placed him there at 8:44 p.m. with Maggie and Paul, less than an hour before they were killed. When investigators confronted Alex with the existence of that video, he changed his story entirely. He admitted he had been at the kennels that night. He said he had simply forgotten. He forgot that he had been at the kennels with his wife and his son on the night they were both killed. That is what he said, and I think you can probably guess how well that explanation landed with investigators and with a jury. The kennel video became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Combined with forensic blood spatter evidence inconsistent with Alex's account of discovering the bodies, and a documented pattern of deception stretching back years, the picture that emerged was of a man who had built an elaborate lie and expected the weight of his family's name to shield him from its consequences, as it always had before. Alex Murdaugh's murder trial began in January of 2023 in Walterboro, South Carolina. It became an immediate national phenomenon. The courtroom was packed every day. Live streams drew millions of viewers. Social media was consumed by it for weeks. The prosecution built their case on the kennel video, the forensic evidence, and the motive. A man whose financial crimes were about to be exposed, whose legal and reputational world was collapsing, and who prosecutors argued took the most devastating action imaginable to try to control his situation. Alex took the stand in his own defense. He admitted to the financial fraud. He admitted to the addiction. He sat in front of that jury and acknowledged that he had spent years lying to and stealing from the people around him. But he maintained, consistently, that he did not kill his wife and his son. The jury deliberated for under 3 hours. On March 2nd, 2023, they returned a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. Guilty of the murder of Maggie Murdaugh. Guilty of the murder of Paul Murdaugh. Judge Clifton Newman sentenced Alex to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. And in delivering that sentence, Judge Newman said something that I think the entire community needed to hear out loud. He told Alex directly, "You've practiced law your whole life, and you've held the highest ideals of what it means to be a lawyer, and you've betrayed those ideals." And that is the sentence that has stayed with me since I started researching this case, because it is so precise. It names exactly what happened here. A man who was given every possible advantage that a legal career and a powerful name could provide, and who used all of it to betray everyone around him. I think about Maggie and Paul constantly since diving into this case, because whatever else surrounds this story, all the fraud and the addiction and the dynasty politics and the courtroom drama, at the absolute center of it are 2 people who simply did not deserve what happened to them. Maggie loved her family with everything she had. She built her life around the people she cared for most, and she was failed by the person who was supposed to be her greatest protector. Paul was 22. He was young and complicated and still becoming, and he never got the chance to finish that journey. And what this case forces us to reckon with, and I think this is genuinely important, is what happens when the people responsible for upholding justice are shielded by it. When the name above the door of the courthouse belongs to the same family as the suspect. When generations of influence mean that warning signs are dismissed, investigations are softened, and accountability, when it finally comes, arrives decades too late for the people who needed it most. Because Alex Murdaugh did not build this criminal life in a single night. It took years. It took hundreds of transactions. It hurt dozens of people across decades. And for a very long time, because of who he was and what his family represented, nobody looked hard enough or long enough at what was actually happening. Mallory Beach deserved better. Gloria Satterfield deserved better. Her sons deserved better. Every single client Alex deceived deserved better. And Maggie and Paul deserved better. The Murdaugh dynasty is finished. A name that once meant power and authority in the South Carolina Lowcountry now means something entirely different. And maybe that is the only form of justice this story has left to give. That eventually, no matter how long it takes, no matter how many layers of protection surround someone, the truth finds the light. It always does. And with that is the Murdaugh Murders. If you want me to go deeper on any piece of this, the Mallory Beach investigation, the Gloria Satterfield story, or what is happening with Buster right now, let me know down below. There is so much more to this case, and I will absolutely go there if you want me to. I read every single comment. Until next time, please stay safe, and I will see your beautiful face in the next video.